General Hospital will reveal. When Emma unexpectedly returned to Port Charles, her presence stirred curiosity and nostalgia among its residents. To most, she was the sweet, polite young woman who had once been the beloved granddaughter of Anna, now coming home to reconnect with family and perhaps seek solace after years away. But beneath the surface of warm welcomes and polite smiles, something felt profoundly off, something no one could quite put their finger on. No one, that is, except Gio. Gio, a quiet observer in town with an instinct finely tuned to danger, was the only one who immediately sensed that Emma's return was more than just a sentimental homecoming. From the moment he laid eyes on her, there was something different, colder, more calculating. Her demeanor was composed, her words chosen too carefully, her movements too precise. It was as if she was studying the town, not returning to it. While others chalked up her aloofness to maturity or teenage rebellion, Gio began to notice patterns, subtle, but undeniable. Late at night, he saw Emma slip away from familiar streets and disappear into the shadows of old warehouses and forgotten alleyways. He followed her, always from a distance, watching as she met with strangers dressed in dark tactical gear, exchanged small devices, and vanished before he could get too close. These weren't the actions of a troubled young girl, they were the moves of someone trained, someone on a mission. The more Gio uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Emma wasn't just hiding something, she was someone else entirely. Through weeks of careful observation and discreet digging, Gio pieced together the truth. Emma was a newly initiated WSB operative, embedded in Port Charles under deep cover. Her mission remained a mystery, but her precision, discipline, and strategic behavior made it clear, she was no amateur. She had been molded into a living weapon, and her target could be anyone. Gio began collecting evidence, photographs of her meetings, recordings of encrypted communications, and even a surveillance map he found after sneaking into the temporary residence Emma was using. Hidden within her belongings were WSB access cards, unregistered communication devices, and dossiers with redacted files pointing to operations far beyond the scope of a typical rookie agent. One partially decoded message sent chills down Joe's spine: target confirmed. Phase 2 begins. Eliminate if compromised. From that moment on, Gio knew he was in danger. He wasn't just an onlooker, he had become a liability. Someone who knew too much. Still, he couldn't stay silent. Emma's presence posed a threat far greater than anyone in town realized. She wasn't just a returning granddaughter, she was a ticking time bomb, programmed to execute a mission that could dismantle the very fabric of Port Charles. Desperate, Gio tried to warn Anna, the one person who might be able to understand the gravity of what he discovered. He sent a secure message containing a fragment of the audio recording, praying she would take it seriously. But before he could make direct contact, tragedy struck. His car's brakes failed as he made his way to their meeting point. The vehicle skidded out of control and crashed into a steel barrier near the docks. He survived, barely, but the message was clear: someone knew what he had found, and they wanted him silenced. Lying in a hospital bed, bruised and broken but alive, Gio realized he was running out of time. Emma was still out there, her mission ongoing, and the town remained blissfully unaware. She wasn't lost, she was precise, methodical, and far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Gio had seen past her smile, past the innocence everyone else clung to, and discovered the truth: Emma wasn't here to reconnect. She was here to infiltrate. And if no one stopped her, she would succeed. When Gio finally decided to warn Anna, everything spiraled out of control faster than he could have anticipated. He had spent weeks carefully gathering intel, documenting Emma's clandestine activities, and decrypting the encrypted messages that pointed to a far-reaching and covert mission orchestrated by WSB. The weight of what he had uncovered was overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. Time was running out, and Emma's presence in Port Charles was no coincidence, it was a calculated infiltration. Anna, once a legendary operative herself, was the only person Gio trusted to grasp the seriousness of the situation and possibly put a stop to it. That night, Gio arranged to meet Anna in private, choosing the interrogation room at the police station after hours, a place he knew would be secure, or so he thought. With a flash drive containing audio files, photographs, and fragments of decrypted code secured in his jacket, he slipped behind the wheel of his car and started toward the station. The streets were quiet, the town eerily calm, as if holding its breath. But Joe's instincts screamed otherwise. He kept checking his mirrors, scanning for headlights that seemed too persistent, too close. And then, just as he turned off the main road and onto the isolated path that led to the old pier behind the station, the nightmare began. Without warning, his steering wheel locked and the brakes failed entirely. Panic surged through him as the car picked up speed, refusing to respond. Gio gripped the wheel, yanking it in a desperate attempt to regain control, but the vehicle spun wildly. He was helpless. The last thing he saw before the crash was the glint of the iron support beam looming at the edge of the dock, and then everything went black. The impact was brutal. The car slammed into the column with enough force to crumple the front end like paper, airbags exploding, glass shattering. Moments later, sirens echoed faintly in the distance, but for Gio, it was already clear, this was no accident. Someone had tampered with his vehicle. The brake lines had been cut, the controls overridden. It wasn't just an attempt to scare him. It was an assassination attempt, professionally executed, meant to silence him before he could speak. As he faded in and out of consciousness, bleeding and broken, Joe's thoughts didn't go to the pain or the wreckage. They went to the truth he had uncovered, the truth someone had clearly tried to bury. Someone knew he had uncovered Emma's secret. Someone powerful. And worse, it could have been Emma herself. Her training, her detachment, her loyalty to WSB, it was all possible. She may have learned of his actions, traced his movements, and acted before he could expose her. When Gio woke up in the hospital, surrounded by machines and hushed voices, he realized he was on borrowed time. Whoever had come for him once would surely try again. The evidence he carried was gone, either destroyed in the crash or taken by someone who had arrived before the first responders. And with no concrete proof left, no one would believe him. The official story would call it an accident, perhaps even blame his recklessness. No one would see it for what it truly was, a deliberate silencing. Isolated and hunted, Gio had no choice but to disappear into the shadows. He couldn't trust the police, the WSB, or even Anna, not until he had something irrefutable. Every step he took had to be calculated, every move masked in secrecy. He began using burner phones, moving between safe houses, relying on forgotten corners of Port Charles to stay out of sight. But he never stopped working. Somewhere deep within the wreckage of what he knew, there was still a trail. Still a thread he could follow. Now, Joe's mission was clear. He had to finish what he started. He had to find new proof, expose Emma's true role before her mission reached its devastating end. The fate of Port Charles depended on it. And though the world thought he had disappeared or died in that crash, Gio was very much alive, and determined to bring the truth into the light, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Anna, once a pillar of strength and unshakable resolve, now found herself trapped in a torment of disbelief and devastation. For a woman who had faced down international arms dealers, unmasked double agents, and survived betrayal from some of the most dangerous figures in global espionage, nothing had prepared her for this, the possibility that her own flesh and blood, Emma, the little girl she once cradled in her arms, the child whose laughter used to echo through her home, had become the very thing she had spent her entire life fighting against. The first signs came subtly. Emma's cold demeanor, the calculated way she evaded questions, her sudden lack of emotional vulnerability. Anna tried to dismiss these things as symptoms of a teenager trying to find herself, shaped perhaps by time away or personal trauma. But deep down, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something far more disturbing was unfolding. It wasn't until she accessed a long-sealed WSB archive, one that required credentials linked to her own former alias within the agency, that the truth began to bleed through the cracks. Inside the encrypted folder was a file labeled Project Echelon, recruitment and integration of operative youth assets. Her heart raced as she scrolled through the pages, recognizing the formatting and language of internal WSB reports. What she discovered shattered her. Emma had been flagged as a potential asset at the age of 14. A handler had been assigned. A cover story had been crafted. And then came the most horrifying detail. She had been enrolled in a covert training program, one designed to embed young operatives inside communities with historical ties to former intelligence agents. The goal was simple, brutal, and chilling: control from within. Emma wasn't an isolated case. Attached to the file was a manifest: names, locations, ages, mission objectives. As Anna scanned the list, a second name struck her with equal force: Jocelyn Jacks. Another child of Port Charles. Another young woman with familial ties to power, tragedy, and secrets. Anna's hands trembled. She felt the room tilt. This wasn't coincidence. This was a plan years in the making. Port Charles had become the target of an underground intelligence network, not to attack from the outside, but to infiltrate, to manipulate, to dismantle from the inside out. And now, as Emma and Joss drew closer, bonded by shared training, purpose, or perhaps by the illusion of friendship, the town unknowingly sat on the edge of a knife. Every movement, every alliance, every moment of silence between the two young women could be a part of something larger. And more terrifying still, Anna realized she could no longer tell whether Emma's smiles were genuine or rehearsed. Emma had always been bright, curious, emotionally intuitive. Anna had imagined her one day becoming a doctor, a scientist, maybe even a leader. Never had she envisioned that same brilliance being weaponized, refined and sharpened into a tool of psychological warfare. Now, Emma seemed to glide through social interactions with eerie ease, gaining trust, planting doubt, all while remaining perfectly innocent in the eyes of those who once loved her. Anna's internal conflict deepened. Her instincts screamed that Emma was compromised. But her heart, the very core of who she was, refused to give up hope. She wanted to believe that somewhere deep inside, the little girl she once knew still existed. That maybe Emma hadn't chosen this path, but had been manipulated into it. That perhaps, if Anna could reach her, if she could just speak to her without the mask of duty and deception between them, she might still find a trace of the child who once held her hand and asked if monsters were real. But time was running out. The network was growing. Port Charles was becoming a web of half-truths and subtle moves on an invisible chessboard. Emma was no longer just a girl. She was a part of something larger, something Anna couldn't fully see, much less control. And the stakes were no longer abstract, they were personal. If Emma chose her mission over her family, if she continued down the path laid out for her by those who had turned her into a ghost in plain sight, Anna would be forced to make a decision she could never take back. Would she risk everything to save Emma's soul? Or would she be the one to bring her down, to stop her, before the dagger Emma had been forged into found its mark in the heart of the family she once called her own? Anna stood at the precipice of heartbreak and war, uncertain which way her next step would fall. And somewhere in the shadows, Emma watched, waiting, calculating, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, hoping to be saved. Meanwhile, Gio, wounded, hunted, and operating entirely in the shadows, had become both the most vulnerable target and the only person holding the key to unraveling a conspiracy far more insidious than anyone could have imagined. He was no longer just an accidental witness, he was the thread that could unravel a carefully woven tapestry of deceit. In the eyes of those pulling the strings, that made him the most dangerous man in Port Charles. Bruised in both body and spirit, Gio now moved like a ghost through the town he once called home. The crash that nearly took his life had silenced any lingering illusions he held about safety. Port Charles, with all its quaint familiarity and seemingly tight-knit community, was no longer safe, at least, not for someone who knew what he did. Every alleyway was a possible ambush. Every familiar face could hide an operative or informant. He had seen firsthand the reach of the organization behind Emma, and he understood now that they operated with precision, patience, and zero tolerance for exposure. Each passing hour increased the risk. The longer he waited, the tighter the net would close around him. Somewhere out there, Emma, or those controlling her, knew he had survived. They were watching, calculating his next move. Gio felt the pressure mounting, the weight of being the only person in possession of truths that could either save or destroy countless lives. His injuries hadn't healed. His resources were minimal. Yet what he lacked in power, he made up for in resolve. Gio understood one unshakable fact: if he failed to act, Port Charles would fall, not with the noise of bombs or gunfire, but quietly, through betrayal, manipulation, and the silent unraveling of trust. The people would never see it coming. They would never suspect that the very individuals they shared their lives with, Emma, Joss, maybe even others, were agents embedded to dismantle the town's foundations from within. Gio worked tirelessly from the underground. He tapped into old connections, former hackers, retired security analysts, and even a few off-the-grid journalists willing to chase whispers of deep-state infiltration. He recompiled lost data from the wreckage, recovered fragments from encrypted messages, and followed digital footprints Emma never expected anyone would find. Piece by piece, he began to reconstruct the full scope of the operation. What emerged was nothing short of chilling. Port Charles was a pilot target. A testing ground. The small-town familiarity, the history of ties to WSB and other intelligence factions, made it the perfect environment to observe how deeply operatives could embed themselves before turning a town's loyalties inward. Emma wasn't just there for one mission, she was the first wave. The vanguard. And Joss wasn't far behind. Despite his fear and the very real risk to his life, Gio knew he had to keep going. He couldn't trust the authorities. Most were already compromised. And Anna? As much as he wanted to reach out again, he feared she was too emotionally entangled to make the right call. Would she hesitate to act against her own niece, even with evidence? Would her heart overrule her instincts? Gio didn't know. And the margin for error was now razor-thin. So, he ran. Not away, but toward the final truth. Toward the confrontation that had to happen. Toward the moment where the people of Port Charles would finally see behind the masks. He operated from the fringe, listening to police radios, hacking into communication towers, and scanning the background of every public appearance Emma made. He memorized her routes. Tracked her associations. And waited for the perfect moment to strike, not with violence, but with undeniable truth. Still, the silence gnawed at him. Every step deeper into the conspiracy meant a step further from safety, from the life he once had. But Gio had already accepted that there would be no return to normal. Not for him. Maybe not for anyone. He wasn't fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting for the soul of Port Charles. Because if he didn't act in time, the peaceful, everyday life that people clung to, their morning coffee runs, family dinners, and small-town laughter, would vanish beneath the crushing weight of a betrayal born in shadows. And the worst part? The ones delivering that betrayal would be the people they loved the most.